One of the most important elements of learning how to play the harpsichord is knowing about early keyboard fingerings, what they are and how they differ from modern piano fingering systems, why they are the way they are, and how to play them in a way to get the best sound out of the instrument. So in today's video, I'm going to be taking you through a whirlwind tour of more than 200 years of early keyboard fingerings, showing you how to play them, how to apply them to your own music, and how to find further information. This video is also part of a series I'm creating on Harpsichord Technique, so subscribe to my channel if you're interested in learning more about how to play the harpsichord. Let's begin. The earliest sources for keyboard fingerings come from the 16th and early 17th centuries. They include writers such as Deruda, Sancta Maria, Buchner, Bach, and Banchieri, as well as music with fingerings written in by composers such as John Bull and Orlando Gibbons. These sources predominantly use paired fingerings, which are fingerings that use a pair of fingers, such as 3-4-3-4 over and over again, or 2-3-2-3. Here's an example of a 3-4-3-4 scale. In each finger pair, these early sources talk about there being a good finger, or a strong finger, or a bad finger, or weak finger, and these fingers respectively play strong and weak notes in the music. There is some discrepancy in these sources about which fingers are strong, especially if the middle finger, the third finger, is strong or weak. But in all these early paired fingering systems, there is little to no use of the thumb. Despite there being some discrepancies, early keyboard fingerings were not arbitrary. They all served to group the notes and make articulations between those groupings, creating shaping and phrasing within the line. Articulation is one of the most important ways of being expressive on the harpsichord, since the dynamic capabilities of the instrument are limited. But how to play articulation on the harpsichord, and what that word really means in relation to learning how to play the harpsichord, is a large subject that I'll discuss in further detail in a future video. So please subscribe to my channel if you want to know when that video comes out. It should also be noted that you can play quite fast with paired fingering groups, even if they might be rather awkward if you're coming from a piano background. The secret is to keep the arm as well as the hand completely relaxed and move close to the keyboard. Otherwise, the hands will get stuck and the fingers won't move fast enough. Here's what Girolamo Deruta had to say in his 1593 treatise called Il Transovano. From much experience, I find one difficulty, and this is the manner of using the fingers of the right hand. When playing ascending passages, the index finger is tense, the thumb is forced beneath the hand, and the little finger is arched too much, causing the muscles of the hand to tighten and become tense, thereby inhibiting the agility of the other fingers. If players instead kept their hand light and supple, they could play the most difficult passages with ease. It should also be noted that paired fingering systems don't exclusively use paired finger groups. Sometimes you find groupings of 3 or even 4 notes, but they're called paired fingering systems because the basis is on paired finger groups. So now let's look at some examples. For 3 as a weak finger, here's part of a Ritschekar by Bach. And for 3 as a strong finger, here's part of a Fantasia by Orlando Gibbons. By the middle to late 17th century, fingering systems started to include the thumb more regularly, though the fingering systems themselves were still based on paired fingerings. It's important to note here that where you play on the thumb is the fleshy part next to the nail, and not next to the knuckle. This is so that you can release the thumb into the palm of the hand, like you would the other fingers when playing the harpsichord. In 1650, Jean Denis said this about the thumb. When I started to study, teachers said as a maxim that one should never play with the thumb of the right hand. But since then I have realized that if one had as many hands as Briareus, who was a Greek mythological figure with 100 arms, one would use all of them, even if there were not enough keys on the keyboard. The thumb started to be included more in scale fingerings, such as in these 1665 examples by Nivers. And the left hand. The thumb increased in usage by the early 18th century, such as in this toccata by Alessandro Scarlatti, who was Domenico Scarlatti's father. As well as in this very important treatise by François Couperin, entitled L'art de toucher le clavecin, or The Art of Playing the Harpsichord. Johann Sebastian Bach's music of course requires use of the thumb, and his son C.P.E. Bach even wrote this about him. My deceased father told me that in his youth he used to hear great men who employed their thumbs only when large stretches made it necessary. Because he lived at a time when a gradual but striking change in musical taste was taking place, he was obliged to devise a far more comprehensive fingering, and especially to enlarge the role of the thumbs and use them as nature intended. Despite this, however, most of the few existing keyboard fingerings we have for J.S. Bach's music are in the old-style paired fingering model, such as the Applicatio from the Klavierbuchlein for Wilhelm Friedemann Bach. Finger substitutions also became a larger part of 18th century harpsichord and keyboard technique. The previously mentioned treatise by François Couperin, L'art de toucher le clavecin, is particularly rich in such examples. By the middle of the 18th century, keyboard fingerings really start to look more like modern piano fingering techniques, with much more use of the thumb in that way. Treatises by people such as Edward Miller, Niccolò Pasquali, Michael Corrette, Jean-Philippe Rameau, and C.P.E. Bach all show these types of fingerings. Later on in this video, I'll give a fuller list of more resources for learning about 18th century keyboard fingerings. Despite the changes we've talked about that happened over time, there are two common themes that ran throughout the time span we've covered. The first is that you should almost never use your thumb on black notes. The author Sancta Maria talks about this in the 16th century, and various writers talk about this for the next 200 years, all the way up to and beyond C.P.E. Bach. As you'll see in the C.P.E. Bach examples that I'm about to play, great lengths were gone to in order to avoid using the thumb on black notes, so that the hand could remain in a closed and relaxed position instead of an open and tense one. Here also is an example using arpeggiation from Niccolò Pasquali's book, The Art of Fingering the Harpsichord, which was published in the second half of the 18th century. The second consistent theme is that you generally contract the hand to change positions, rather than picking up the hand to move to a new place on the keyboard. Sancta Maria gave a 16th century example of this, which does include the thumb. As did other writers such as Edward Miller as late as the 1760s. Here's the first example that he gives, which shows how he feels most people use fingering on the harpsichord. And here's what he thinks is a better fingering. So now that you know more about these early fingerings, what's the best way to practice them? And how can you find more information based on the specific repertoire you may be working on? I think the best place to start to work on paired fingerings are with two simple exercises. The first is a 5-note pattern, where you play 5 notes in a row, but they're all using the same finger, such as the 3rd finger or the 2nd finger, like this. When you're doing that, you have to make sure that your hand is relaxed and that to release the key, you relax down into the key and then release into the palm of your hand. Down into the key, release into the palm of your hand to move to the next note, and then you move sideways instead of any upward motion. You can also come back down, but making the shift from weight that's going upwards to weight that's going downwards can be a bit tricky. So it's better to just start going in one direction and stop there until you've mastered that. The second exercise, once you've mastered the first, is to start playing paired fingering scales, such as 3-4-3-4-3-4 or 2-3-2-3-2-3 in both hands and in both directions. So here's a 2-3-2-3 scale, since we did a 3-4-3-4 earlier in this video. You should also practice 2-1-2-1 in the left hand especially, since that is where it frequently shows up. And as you can see, I often change the fingering on the way back down, both to practice different fingerings, but often because that's the case in actual music. With these exercises, it's definitely best to start on all white note scales, and once you've mastered those, you can branch out to scales that have a few accidentals, but it's not particularly useful in scales that have a lot of black notes. If you need or would like more information about how to play the harpsichord in general, I have a video about basic harpsichord technique that I'll link up in the cards. It should be somewhere over here, so you can take a look at that if you would like to. To find repertoire with original fingerings that will help you figure out what fingerings you should be using in your own pieces, here are several sources that I think are particularly useful, and I'll put more about them in the description below, including links to those that you can buy online. There's an early keyboard fingerings anthology by Boxall and Lindley, as well as an early keyboard fingerings comprehensive guide by the same authors. There's a book called The Fingering of Virginal Music, which is just a collection of music that has written in fingerings. And there's a book by my colleague, Yonit Kosovske, called Historical Harpsichord Technique, where many of the quotes and examples for this video came from. For a more general resource, there's also the great book Performance Practice, Music After 1600, which contains a section on keyboard fingerings and articulation, as well as a lot more general information about all of the music from the early Baroque and late Baroque periods. As I said, I'll put a lot more information about all these books down in the description below, as well as links to places that you can buy them for those that are available. There are also numerous historical treatises that offer a wealth of information about early keyboard fingerings. All the examples today, for the most part, were drawn from these treatises, except for a few pieces I used that have written-in fingerings. Here's a list of all the treatises I mentioned in this video, as well as some others that are also useful. I'll also put links in the description below to where you can find these treatises online, as well as links to places where you can buy English translations of the ones that have been translated. And if this list seems overwhelming, the first two I'd check out are the François Couperin L'Art de toucher le clavecin, since it includes a lot of practical music examples in addition to text, and then the CPE Bach treatise, which is a large work that deals with all sorts of elements related to playing the harpsichord and other keyboards of the time, specifically the fortepiano and the clavichord. So that's everything I wanted to cover in today's video. And as I mentioned before, I'll be putting out more videos in the future on harpsichord technique, so subscribe to my channel if you're interested in learning more about how to play the harpsichord. And don't forget to hit that little notification bell so that you get a notification every time I put out a new video, which is every Tuesday. And if you found the information in this video useful or helpful, please give it a like and then leave me a comment with any questions you have. Thanks so much for watching.